All right, today we're going to be talking about part 2, section 4, and we're actually going to be going into the actual substantive plan to solve world hunger, part 1. So first, let's start off with a quote. Father talks about preparing to bring solution to the world hunger problem. He says, every year, 20 million people die of starvation. That is 60,000 people a day. Is the President of the United States going to take responsibility for that? Will Gorbachev of the Soviet Union take responsibility? Who will take responsibility for this? Who in the world is going to do that? The true parents and the siblings of the true parents have to take responsibility for this. For this reason, all our work with the sea is something I've been planning and preparing for over the last 20 years. So in the last episode, we had actually been discussing, right, that 20-year period between 1974 to 1994 of Ocean Providence in North America. And we clearly saw that that 20-year period was basically a time of preparation in order to solve the hunger problem of the world. So we're going to review a little bit. Right. So first of all, we cannot make appropriate decisions about Ocean Providence or about anything in general without first understanding true parents' purpose, plan, and current situation. So the purpose, becomes clear by first knowing the motivation and the hearts of true parents and understanding the hunger problem that they are trying to solve. The plan can be understood by analyzing True Father's words and actions and where he invested in. And the current situation can be understood by knowing the history through analyzing how far the plan has come and where it has failed. So today we're going to, and only after that, it really truly becomes clear what we can do right now with what we have right now. So today we're going to be discussing specifically about the full picture of the actual substantive plan to solving the problem of world hunger. So this is another review, but last time we were talking about the time period from 1974, August 1st, which was the start of the North American Ocean Providence, and the 20-year North American Ocean Providence period up to 1994, where in August 1st, he had, held the commemorative expo where he revealed through a speech called the Oceanic Realm, Development of the Oceanic Realm, about Ocean Providence and the whole plan. And in 1994, he had also began officially the second 40-year course as FFWPU. So last time, we talked about how the 20-year course of the North American Ocean Providence was really this, period of preparation of developing a global economic foundation and rich marine resources of the United States in order to resolve world peace, in order to bring world peace by resolving world hunger. So it was this time of preparation. And this is kind of just a picture on August 1st, 1994 of that Ocean Providence Expo that was held at Belvedere, New York. And the 20-year anniversary expo of the North American Ocean Providence was basically this culmination of 20 years and a stepping stone to begin the South American Providence. And at that expo, true parents had displayed a lot of the Ocean Providence activities that they had done throughout those 20 years. And in front of the true children and leaders from churches around the world and thousands of members, he spoke about the entire plan for the future of Ocean Providence and clarified the future direction of our movement. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about the two following points. First of all, the framework for the plan to solve world hunger that True Father explains, and number two, this first part of the plan to solving poverty and hunger that True Father revealed in his speech, Development of the Oceanic Realm, during that expo. So first, before we get into the actual content of True Father's speech, let's first explain we're first going to explain the framework we used for putting together the content in the first place. So one thing to note, though, is that almost all the words that we quote will be from the particular speech given on August 1st, 1994. And it is this picture of the full plan, right? But he didn't go into, the itty-bitty details, right? So that might mean that he doesn't mention certain things. So for example, he doesn't mention restaurants, but that doesn't mean that restaurants, it wasn't a big part of Ocean Providence. So just a disclaimer, right? That just because something isn't mentioned doesn't mean that it isn't part of Ocean Providence. It just wasn't mentioned, right? This is a very big, broad picture of Ocean Providence in general. Now, let's start, right? So first, I'm just going to show you an outline of True Father's substantive plan. And as you can see, there are kind of like two parts, part one and part two. So in order to explore the substantive plan that True Father talked about in order to solve world hunger, we divided the plan into two parts in order to be more digestible. And So actually, these two parts are derived from something True Father says in his autobiography, where he talks about the solution to poverty and hunger. He says simply distributing food supplies by itself will not resolve hunger. A more fundamental approach to the problem is needed. I'm considering two fundamental and concrete methods, and these two fundamental methods is what we used in order to develop these two parts. So the first, True Father says, is to provide ample supplies of food at low cost, and the second is to share technology that people can use to overcome hunger on their own. So we're going to be dividing this plan to solve world hunger into these two methods to explain. So the plan to solve the hunger problem is essentially split into these two methods that he explains. One, distributing ample supplies of food at low cost, and two, which is providing technology to overcome hunger. So method one of distributing food is basically this idea of securing food, right? Getting the actual food needed and the resources, and actually food distribution. So actually bringing them and giving them to the people who need them. So that's method one, right? And that includes kind of like things like fishery, farming, aquaculture, shipbuilding, things like that. And method two, which is providing technology to overcome poverty, is more focused on things like popularization of aquaculture ponds, basically spreading technology needed to overcome hunger, or, sharing and educating people about it. So these are kind of the two methods that True Father had come up with. And many projects that True Parents have invested in, throughout their life can be classified actually into these two methods. Now we're going to go on to the actual method to solve poverty and hunger, and this is method one, which is distributing ample supplies of food at low cost. So this is part one of that plan. So the first method he proposed was distribute ample supplies of food at low cost. So let's do a real quick review of our episode part 1.3, which was about the realities of world hunger, specifically about the food distribution problem, right? So during that episode, we had discussed how the hunger problem didn't really lie in the problem of supply or the amount of resources there were, but really lied in the problem with distribution, right? The United Nations World Food Program, points out the fact that although the world has enough food to feed all of mankind, the food is not reaching the ones that actually need that food. So they actually call hunger problem, the world's most solvable problem, because we have the necessary resources, but we're not actually using those resources properly. And, this is some statistics, but, we're producing food enough for 12 billion people, and we only have 8 billion people in the world population. So we have 4 billion people worth of food surplus, right? And this food is not reaching the people that needs to. So I'm going to be giving two examples of this distribution problem, right? And example one is the fact that there are more obese people than there are hungry people in the world, right? This is a statistic from 2010. There's 1.5 billion people who are considered obese, and that's a lot more than the 920 million people who suffer from food shortage. Right. And, of course, throughout the years up to now, the numbers fluctuate. But even now, consistently, the fact of the matter is that there are more obese people than there are people who are hungry. So the IFRC, reported that in 2010, 925 million people in the world were undernourished. But at the same time, 1.5 billion people were suffering from obesity, too much food. So in other words, there are more people in the world who suffer from the condition where they have, too much food, right, than people who are suffering from, not having enough food. The distribution problem example number two is that 30 to 40% of food is being discarded just in the United States. So the United States is the world's largest exporter of food. But in 2010, the FDA had announced that approximately 30 to 40, almost 50, almost half of the food in America is being wasted annually. So it was announced that approximately 60 billion kilograms of food had been wasted in 2010. And that's a really big number, right? It's said that humans eat about 2.5 kilograms of food per day, and we need about 900 kilograms of food per year. By that calculation, 60 billion kilograms of food could have been used to feed 66 million people that need it. However, that food wasn't being used properly, wasn't distributed to those people who need it, and was instead wasted. So you can see, right, in this way, when examining this hunger problem, it can be said, that the problem is not actually in the food production or resources, but rather in the distribution. So we're not able to share it with those who actually need the food. Therefore, the first plan to distribute ample supplies of food at low cost is very important. So let's take a look at how True actually planned to solve this distribution problem by dividing the plan into 6 steps. So step 1 is the gateway into the marine industry, which is boat manufacturing. So, we mentioned boats several times in previous episodes, and we're going to continue mentioning it about small boats. But the reason why is because small boats were the main tool for the Ocean Church, right? Many boats were built for training purposes for the members. But let's see what True Father says on August 1st, 1994 about these boats and the reason why he invested so much into it. He says, in that speech, without a boat, no matter how good the environmental conditions are for Providence, nothing can be done. And that's a very big claim, right? He's saying that no matter, how good the conditions are, if we don't have a boat, we can't be able to do anything. So he explains, right? He explains that the most important thing is establishing a relationship with the sea is the boat. So he's basically saying that one of the biggest things that we need to do is establish a relationship with the sea. But in order to do that, we need to have a boat. He explains, if we build a boat, it must be built so that the boats that the Unification Church builds are recognized and more famous than those built by other companies at the global standard and as history goes by. I thought about how to lay the foundation for young people to feel without fear. I have to go out to the sea again today because I went out to the sea yesterday. So True Father, has this idea, has this vision that he wants young people, he wants members to go out to the ocean willingly without fear for the sake of Ocean Providence. So then he explains that at that time, the idea of building an unsinkable boat came to me. I wondered how to build a boat that wouldn't sink even if it was turned over and wouldn't sink even in the swaying sea. Floating the boat on the beach or in a river nearby that even children can easily steer around, and the children in that village get on the boat or dive under the boat and have fun playing, they naturally become interested in the sea. So the idea was basically True Father wanted people to become connected to the sea, become attracted to the sea, want to be involved with the Ocean Providence, and he saw that he could do that through building boats. He explains, even if we continued to fish for 20 years, the real thrill of going out to the sea would never end. We don't have time. The most important thing in business is that you have to have a solid foundation at the starting point. It was the one hope that I worked hard to make after thinking about various things. You would not know this, but remember that One Hope is the best boat in the world for effective fishing in bad weather, no matter what kind of fish you catch, whether it's tuna or trout. Have you ever wondered how special this boat is? And this question really is for us members, right? For all of us, right? Have you ever wondered and realized, the importance behind this boat, behind One Hope, behind the Good Go, because there was so much True Father had poured into it. He explains the island symbolizes a woman. A boat like a small island floating in the sea symbolizes a woman. Well, in the world, the most beautiful boat, like the most beautiful woman, whether viewed from above or from the side, is our boat. This boat has no bulges and has a wonderfully natural streamline. It is formed beautifully like an egg. Did everyone notice this? Didn't you know? In other words, I'm telling you to etch these words in your head permanently and never forget it. Of all the Alaskan boats, the boat that is trolling and actually catching fish well, fast, portable, and good-looking was our boat. It's not an average boat. So he's stressing the point of how special, right? How it's the most beautiful and most wonderful boat that there is. He also says, One Hope comes to mind when I think of boats, and One Hope is the best. One Hope means one purpose, one determination. Please memorize it like this. He really wanted us members to really understand the meaning behind One Hope, right? And he even spent so much time on just the name, thinking of that name and putting so much meaning behind it. Right? True Father's hope was almost literally poured into the one hope. So as a summary of step one, right, basically in starting oceanic businesses, True Father needed a way to basically train personnel who could carry out his plan in the first place, right? So the best way to go about doing this was training members with a small boat. Therefore, True Father needed a boat that could guide and train the members who were willing to follow the way of Ocean Providence throughout their lives. And for this reason, the boat had to be safe, it had to be easy to use, and it also had to be attractive, right? That way it's very comfortable for us, or not comfortable, but we would be more willing to actually be involved with that. And One Hope was a boat that he had designed and put so much thought into and built for this exact specific purpose. So the shipbuilding industry was also the gateway into various other marine industries, which we're going to be talking about in step two, which is to expand to the transportation industry. Now, expanding from the shipbuilding industry into the transportation industry was in order to ensure a way to distribute large amounts of food internationally, and we're going to explain what that means. So True Father explains, right, we will build high-performance boats of various sizes in Alaska. Subsequent goals are to build transport ships that carry fish and goods. We will build a 6,000-ton class ship so that you can carry whatever you need. As more and more fish are caught, transport ships will be needed, and we will naturally connect with the transport industry. By the same theory, if we continue to increase the size of the transport ship, it will become an oil tanker that carries hundreds of thousands of tons of crude oil. If you want to run a world-level shipyard, you have to expand your facility so that you can build ships of any size. So by entering the marine industry through initially, small boat and shipbuilding and gradually building larger and larger ships, we can naturally connect with other industries in the marine industries. So, and the most important of these connections to be made was with the transportation industry. And True Father explains, various industries developed from there, centering on manufacturing boats. In relation to the aquaculture industry, we will develop technology, deepen our relationship with the transportation industry, and gradually functionally connect with many manufacturing industries. In this way, we will create a relationship that controls the marine industry and open the way to control the land also. Along with the importance of fishing, we must advance the transportation industry from now on. We must foster a transportation industry that connects Japan across the North Sea through the Bering Strait and to the Americas. So this plan, he had this plan and this vision to essentially build a large global transportation network throughout the world by entering that transportation industry. So a summary of step two, right? In step one, we had talked about initially starting shipbuilding and training people with small boats. And then essentially in step two, start expanding that shipbuilding industry by building bigger and bigger boats. And then along the way, we would be able to cultivate relationships with other marine industries. And in particular, True Father's plan was to subsequently expand into the transportation industry and build this large global transportation business and network throughout the whole entire world. That leads us to step three, which is to create a global distribution network centered on that transportation network. So he wanted to basically essentially build a vast global distribution network, a network where we can go anywhere in the world and distribute, supplies and resources. And he wanted to do that by connecting this network of large transport ships with a regional transport network of smaller boats to deliver food directly to impoverished areas. True Father says, he gives an example, right? The purpose of Reverend Moon investing in the marine industry so much is to reach into any underdeveloped lands in any country using the transportation technologies of the marine industry in the future. If in Africa, people are starving and die of lack of food, but the food is abundant here and there in countries around the world. A huge amount of food called surplus products sleeps in the warehouse every year. As you may know, in the 1980s, before I was imprisoned in Danbury, I bought more than 200 mobile home trailers, which are houses that move. I distributed them to each church, telling them to go around the country. The reason for doing this was to use the trailers to go around the warehouses and transport various groceries such as canned foods and processed foods. In the United States, the surplus foods stored in warehouses can be taken by anyone who needs them. They say that we have the right to take surplus foods if we can take more than 18 tons, but not if it is less than 18 tons. If you say that you can transport more than 18 tons of surplus food for the poor, the national government will pay you compensation to help you with the costs of moving your vehicle. While doing such work, I had a vision that I was preparing for the future. When the time came, tens of thousands of tons of food would be shipped together and distributed to hungry people in Africa and around the world. I have been preparing for that. So you can see that even, back then, right, before Danbury, he said, he had bought a bunch of trailers in order to move this surplus food so that it's not wasted and sent to people who actually need it. So, and at the end of this excerpt, he, talks about his vision, this vision that he has for the future that he's been preparing for, where we're able to really, bring tens of thousands of tons of food throughout the world to people who need it all over the world and not just in America. And right, so in wealthy countries like America, like Truffaut was explaining, there's a lot of surplus food that goes to waste each year, while in other countries, there are people who have nothing to eat. So once we build an international transportation industry, we'll be able to deliver that surplus food from developed nations to poorer nations who actually need that food. So the purpose of building up that transportation industry is to essentially get that food to the poorer countries. Along with that, right, Truffaut also wanted to reduce the cost of transporting food and create a more efficient and cheaper method that's necessary and that doesn't require refrigeration, which is pretty expensive and really hard to maintain. So with this in mind, right, Truffaut had developed top quality fish powder, right, that's not only healthy, but also inexpensive and really easy to transport and also distribute to people all over. He talks about the fish powder here. He says, in this way, let's connect the tourism industry and the hobby industry to the fishery industry, operate transport ships, and distribute the world's surplus food to poverty-stricken areas. That is why I developed a transportable quality fish powder. So even the fish powder was for the purpose of, distributing food properly to the people who need it. He then says, with the United States as the central nation and the representative of the world, the countries of the world must trade and form ties with the United States in order to export or import. When a ship crosses the sea from all over the world and arrives at an American port, it becomes an empty ship and returns to its own country after unloading. When the vacant ship approaches a port somewhere, if our members living in the land cooperate to quickly load and unload and develop a transportation system that effectively uses the vacant space, they will succeed as a transporter. So what he's essentially saying here is that normally ships that come to ports in America and unload, and then they go back to their own country empty. But Truffaut is basically saying that we as members should develop this transportation system where we can quickly unload, but then also reload the ship so that that ship can take back something. And with this kind of effective and really efficient transportation system, he saw that we would be able to succeed as a transporter. And he also explained that if the local government sees such a transportation network using ships, it will surely be interested and come to help. This project has that much benefit. As we become leading companies in the marine industry and serve the world, nations around the world will support us. So that last part is very interesting and important. He says, as we become leading companies in the marine industry and serve the world, nations around the world will support us. Nations around the world will want to support us, right? As we build a global transportation network, our actions, very clear actions and visible actions and results, will show everybody watching, our true intentions and our seriousness toward, achieving world peace. So by doing that, we will naturally gain the support of different governments, different organizations around the world, such as the United Nations, which is essentially, a government organization looking to achieve, goals for world peace. And they will see what we're doing and naturally would want to help us achieve it and support us and maybe even fund us, right? And then Truffaut says, imagine the people of the world's developed nations getting to know, be inspired, and get excited as we use ships entering the harbor to distribute food to the villages of the world. All you have to do is go around the port cities all over the world, take a rest when you arrive, unload your cargo, and enter the local site. So he had this vision and this idea in mind that we're not only, distributing food, but we're also inspiring everyone else in the world who's watching to this group of people who are living for the sake of others, right, without any other intention in mind, just to live for the sake of others, and other people will be inspired by seeing that. True Father also explains, however, transportation such as roads is not well developed in the hinterlands of Africa. In undeveloped lands, humans are constantly pursuing water and settling at the water's edge and estuaries. So we make good use of small boats to get into the shallow interiors of the waterways. The estuaries and sea routes are so well connected that waterways are more commonly used in the transportation industry than land routes. Right. These are some maps of some places that are less developed. But so essentially what Truffaut's saying is that waterways are a more effective means of transportation and distribution, especially in underdeveloped lands where roads and infrastructure is lacking, right? Lacking in maintenance or lacking in general. So large ships, right? Large ships can't enter small waterways, but we have the ability to use smaller boats, right? And we can use those small boats to make our distribution system even more effective, where we can even reach inland villages and their people, further expanding our transportation network and distribution network to reach, practically everywhere all over the world. So this is a summary of step 3. Right, so up to step 2, the plan was to basically start with the shipbuilding industry, enter the transportation industry, and expand the transportation business internationally. And then step 3, the plan was to first distribute surplus food from developed countries and food, such as fish powder, internationally using large transport ships, and then use smaller boats, different sized boats, to distribute the supplies to the local areas with poor infrastructure. By developing an international food distribution like this, right, we would be able to deliver food to the actually hungry population and kind of, help resolve that distribution issue. That leads us to step 4, which is to enter the hobby and tourism industry. Right, Truffaut wanted to essentially start hobby tourism businesses in various parts of the world. And through hobby tourism, he saw that we could create an economy and expand our base and make the operation sustainable. In addition, we would also be able to develop tourist destinations around the world that will lead to an international tourism network. Truffaut explains why this is important. He says, in the future, what we need to do is to start a tourism business that uses small boats to fish and carry goods. In order to develop the tourism industry, we will use the manufacturing technologies of small boats to eventually deploy small boats in major port towns around the world and hope to be able to guide tens of thousands of customers for sightseeing and fishing. Distribute the surplus foods in the warehouses of the developed nations of the world to save those who are starving to death, he says. If the marine industry and the transportation industry are promoted, centering on small vessels in this way, we promote the tourism business. Supplies will be available at any amount and can be used effectively. In this way, we can open the way for developed and developing countries to trade with each other. We will start a tourism business on a global scale. What is called a hobby industry will be flourishing. Imagine that in the future, there will be no tourist destination around the world where tourists will not experience the boats manufactured by the Unification Group. How can we create such a global organization? The hobby industry, Truffaut says, right? It's a hobby industry. Do you understand? We go around the villages while bringing people on sightseeing trips and distribute supplies while transporting them. Then what kind of development will be made? While entering the villages and distributing supplies, you will be able to interact with and connect with local households. We will develop a system that can supply fish all year round regardless of the season. In that way, we can organize distribution stations in each region so that we can distribute fish to anyone. In this way, we can have interactions with local households. Do you understand? So, so that was a lot, but essentially what he's saying is that the hobby and tourism industry will give us an economic sustainability and also help accelerate equalization among developed and developing countries. So according to his explanation of his plan, right, we start the tourism businesses centering on these small, attractive, good go boats, right, used to deliver foods and goods, right, in these hinterlands, right, and at the same time develop goods distribution and economic infrastructure. And tourism also enables connections with local people and paves the way for trade and relationships between developed countries and developing countries. So this will essentially encourage, investment, right, from developed people, developed countries, and to developing countries, and basically essentially help stimulate the local economy and help bring equalization to the underdeveloped regions, centering on that tourism industry. And through that, we will be able to develop this kind of hobby tourism business all over the world and connect different nations. So this is kind of the vision of the hobby tourism industry that your father had, centering on small boats. So essentially with small boats, he wanted to connect international distribution network to inland regions, right? He wanted to be able to distribute even like not just the coastal cities, but also, inland where the poorer villages are. And then also with small boats, he wanted to begin hobby and tourism industry. And with the small boats, he also wanted to distribute food and supplies to impoverished areas. And through all of that, with all of that, he saw that we would be able to link the developed and developing nations through a global tourism network, right? By, promoting this ocean tourism, this hobby tourism with boats, right? We would be able to spur investment from developed nations and stimulate the local economy and help them grow their livelihood. And along with that, we would be able to harmonize with the local people and create this environment where we can live for the sake of others. And, I don't know if you guys can notice, but this content here is kind of related to the topic in 2.2, which is episode 6, where we talked about the ocean hobby industry base. But the idea is very similar, right? True Father basically wanted in every location throughout the world, this ocean hobby industry base, this base where we would be able to distribute food to the local people, but also help that local community through tourism and connect the world globally with those bases. So a summary of step 4, right? So up to step 3, we talked about how to deliver food to the hungry, which is the main purpose of the Ocean Providence. And to that end, we formed this international distribution network centered on the shipbuilding and transportation industries, centering on large ships and smaller boats. But the plan does not stop just there, right? Step 4 is essentially, saying that by incorporating the hobby and tourism industry into such a distribution network, we can also ensure economic sustainability and narrow this gap between developed and underdeveloped nations by giving them this chance to have a relationship. And that brings us to step 5, which is to take the lead in the global market. In order to solve this food problem, we need to have a huge economic foundation, or practically speaking. And the distribution network we build will be used not only for the distribution of food, but also for the distribution of resources and other products to connect all kinds of markets in the world. So in order to permanently solve the hunger problem, that even the United Nations, which is a huge organization that already has a lot of money, hasn't been able to solve, we also need to have and establish a really big economic foundation for it to practically work. How can we build this economic foundation? True Father explains, the fate of the future depends on who will take the lead in guiding the global economic base. To date, productive nations have processed raw materials, manufactured goods, and monopolized profits. After that era, from now on, the nation that can supply raw materials controls the industrialized nation. Then resources are exhausted, the price rises little by little, so everyone cares about who owns the resource. The United States is also worried about how to conserve oil and other resources. No matter how great your production technology is, it will eventually be useless. So in the end, what the world will demand in the future is to seize the large global market. This will be the most important. Therefore, we organize distribution offices so that cheap products are directly passed into the hands of consumers. That way, you don't have to go to a department store or retail store for the product. The future consumer life will change like this. So what your father is saying here is that basically in the past, right, up to that point, the leading companies in the world are, basically companies in countries that have the most resources and most manufacturers, right? But he's seeing, or he foresees that in the future, the leaders of the economy would be people who have control over distribution. over distribution and retail. So this can actually be seen. This trend can actually be seen in this this chart here, right? Which shows the transition of top private companies in just the United States. So in 1990, you can see that the top companies are all manufacturers, producers, resource companies, right? But then in 2000, suddenly Walmart pops up, right? And Walmart is a retail distributor company. And in 2010, Walmart suddenly is number one out of all of them, right? And then in 2020 and from then on, you can see an increasing amount of the retail and distributor companies, taking over and becoming top companies in the world. And, many people, we know about Amazon. It's really famous, right? And it's really not powerful per se, but has a lot of influence on the economy because it has control over distribution and retail, right? So you can see, right, that now is this age where companies with distribution networks and market access are the ones that are rapidly expanding and taking over the economy. And Truffaut had foreseen this in 1994, right, even before this was happening. So Truffaut really understood the trends of, the economy, and he was really a genius, right? So essentially, his idea was that we would become, basically the Amazon of the marine industry of the world. He explains, our company has developed an excellent freezing storage system. We can use it to expand our distribution and sales organization globally so that we can deliver any seafood to developing markets. The key to dominating the market is to manage the rational distribution and sales system down to the town and village level and reduce the price. Then it will work anywhere in the world. So in order to end hunger and to close the gap between rich and poor in the world, it's necessary that we have, we can take this lead in the global economy. However, in the future, it will not be manufacturing or securing resources that will enable us to take the lead, but rather Truffaut declared that in the future, and he really, really predicted correctly, that the economy would be controlled by a group that could access the world market through distribution networks. So essentially, he had this idea that we would be able to access the global market with our international distribution network and our worldwide hobby tourism network, and that we would be able to sell and transport food, goods, and products anywhere throughout the whole entire world. And Truffaut believed that with this method, we could then lead the world economy and then eliminate the gap between the rich and the poor and ultimately achieve world peace by guiding the world economy in that direction. So in summary, right, so up to step 4, the plan was to first of all build an international distribution network that can deliver food to the hungry, and 2, in addition, build, this hobby and tourism network to promote the equalization of underdeveloped countries. And step 5 was essentially to use this global network to distribute and sell globally, lead the world economy, and to build a huge economic foundation that can end the hunger problem that no one has been able to solve thus far. And that brings us to the final step of part 1, right, which is step 6, which is to grow and to become the permanent overseer and caretaker. So once the foundation for solving, this hunger problem is put in place, right, we need to be able to actually manage it sustainably across generations. And this is because our goal is to not just temporarily solve hunger within just this generation, right? It's supposed to be a permanent solution, a solution that lasts for forever. So if there's a group of people with the ability and conviction to complete and protect and sustain this plan over generations, no matter what, the world's hunger problem would be able to be permanently solved. So generally speaking, right, no matter how good your external plan is or what successes you achieve, right, many people have had throughout the world, throughout history, has had many different good ideas, different good plans to solve different issues in the world. But no matter how good that plan is, without the right ideology, it will not be able to succeed. It will not be able to last. The plan explained throughout these past steps, these steps that we're talking about to this point, must be implemented by a specific group of people with a strong conviction who will never ever give up and will grow as people who live for the sake of the world and will want to do this for the right purpose. And they need to be able to raise themselves as ideal families who will implement it correctly over generations. Therefore, the next step is in regards to us, the blessed families. Father says, but in the end, the most important thing is to have human connections and develop good human resources. When working in the marine industry, it is important to develop human resources who want to spend all of their lives for it, and that it is a God-given occupation. The key challenge is how to develop such human resources and how to instruct and pass that spirit to their descendants. So the plan of Ocean Providence is not a temporary plan, right? As I mentioned before. And in order to permanently solve the problem of hunger, we have to have people who can sustain that foundation across generations, who will be willing to pass on to future generations the real purpose behind, this plan. So he says, those who live in the United States must go beyond the United States, and those who live in the world must go beyond the boundaries of the world, seeking a way to move forward. We must know that the higher the border that we have to cross, in proportion to that, more preparation, suffering, patience, and hardship are necessary. So True Father hoped that us members would transcend and cross national borders for the sake of the world. Right? He called this out to the members. Also, you can know at the same time at the start of the South American Providence in 1995. He says, I mentioned earlier that humans must cross boundaries and live to higher stages. We live seeing the world, but perhaps no one knows the world as much as the members of the Unification Church who travel around the world, and there's no country they don't know. You are trained that way. So True Father is really, he's almost proud of the fact that, Unification members have traveled around the world, have, gone over boundaries, right? And he saw that we were the ones that could carry out his plan because we, are able to fulfill this, right? We are able to transcend those borders. He says to the Unificationists, right? He says, you have relatives in all nations around the world. You can freely move between countries by inviting friends to your relatives' homes or visiting your friends' relatives' homes, right? Think about how wonderful it is. You will be invited by households all over the world. Then you can expand your relationship and go to countries around the world during the tourist season. We can do it, right? We can do it because we are connected with various countries through international marriage. You can enjoy your work and actually do community service work. Imagine that 100 families live in a poverty-stricken village in Africa and that relief supplies are shipped from 100 countries, such as the United States and the United Kingdom. The inhabitants of the land will admire us and say, wow, how great the Unification Church is. It's doing what the world's great powers in the United States can't do. It's really trying to unite the world. Through your efforts, they will be truly grateful to God. Our world, suffers from nations prioritizing themselves over the rest of the world, nations insisting on nationalism and never-ending religious conflict. It's full of people who can't trust each other or feel each other suffering, and in order to protect just themselves, they continue to pursue nationalistic and more selfish sentiments, right? But in order for mankind to, begin to regain trust in each other as brothers and sisters, first of all, an organization, a group of people must appear that holds this altruistic ideology that can transcend national boundaries, and they have to become this model to live for the sake of others for the rest of the world permanently. And that organization should be the one and only family federation that inherits this ideology of true parents. And True Father had said, through your efforts, they will be truly grateful to God. So if we, as blessed families who work toward the resolution of world hunger, are able to actually do this, we will be able to become true living testimony of the existence of God and the love of our true parents for the world. True Father asks the members, are you all interested in this job? For 20 years, I've been deeply and deeply interested in such a plan and was taking action. You must be the same. You never imagined it, but this is an amazing thing. So this is a summary of method 1, essentially, right? True Father, first of all, began us with boat manufacturing and training youths. And then he wanted us to expand into the transportation industries by continuing to expand, how the boats that we build, and then essentially through that transportation industry, build a global distribution network where we can reach throughout the whole entire world. And then he wanted us to develop tourism business in hungry regions while distributing food to that local area, and develop global distribution and sales business to establish this economic foundation. And then blessed families would essentially maintain this vast distribution network over multiple generations to create a world where essentially we would be able to achieve equalization, where these developing countries are no longer developing, but will be able to, stand on par with the developed countries thanks to equalization. So in summary, right, Truefather had spent his entire life carrying out the Ocean Providence, and in that process, he invested in so many projects and trained, members on the ocean until the very end of his earthly life. So hopefully you can clearly see, that all this content, consistently connected to this specific speech, the development of the oceanic realm given on August 1st, 1994, about this concrete plan. We can see that the things that Truefather worked on and had accomplished, were not isolated standalone projects, but they were all clearly connected and interconnected as part of this grand plan aiming for a permanent solution to the hunger problem of the world. And in the next episode, we'll be diving into method 2, the second part of the substantive plan that Truefather explains. This is one final quote. Truefather says, Ocean Church is not a random whim. Everything that I do has a purpose which covers thousands of years. When Ellen Hokinson gets in the New Hope and drives, he has a purpose. But when I take the New Hope out, my purpose is much wider and greater. Everything that Truefather had done had a bigger purpose, and a lot of thought went into it, and it was all connected to this big plan and purpose. Thank you for listening.